So here we go. My name is Brian McAloon, and we are meeting with Andrea Branch. Together, we are going to work on the College for America Blue Path project, Race in the United States.
I'm Andrea Branch.
Andrea, do you want to go ahead and summarize real quick what we're going to be talking about during the meeting?
Sure. We are going to be discussing, I have my work computer over here, so I've got all my monitors up. I've got my 4 monitors now. So we are going to be discussing what race is. We're going to talk about the 2 biggest myths dealing with race.
Yep. Basically, the idea that once we take a look at all of this, we'll work together to build the poster that goes along with it, and then we'll be able to hopefully pass. So why don't we start? What are your thoughts on what the 2 biggest myths are after reading the materials?
Right. Well, my biggest one that I was most interested in was that race has no genetic basis. That was my biggest thing, just not even ever thinking about that in the past until I read this. And that it's a modern idea, that it doesn't go back ages, that it's definitely a new thing in our culture.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's my number one, is that the myth being that race is a genetic construct, the fact that it's more of a social construct as opposed to anything else. It was a real eye-opener for me, kind of reading through it.
Yeah, definitely. It was for me as well. I mean, just reading, one of my favorite little things, which I was teasing with my husband about the genetic variations. There was a question that asked, who has the most, which group has the most genetic variation? And it was humans, chimpanzees, and everything. And it was fruit flies. I was like, that was really, that to me was interesting. I'm like, and 2 people in a group, just being, 2 white people or 2 black people, have 2 white, quote unquote white people, may have more variance in their genetic genes than, a white and a black person, or,
yeah.
Just within a culture, or in a, where you are, that was, to me, was extremely interesting.
Right. Absolutely. I absolutely thought that the racial classifications that the government used, I read through those, and I took real specific notes as to what each one of them specifically was defined as.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, it made me think a lot about why it's set up the way that it is, and why it's more of a social construct.
Right.
But yeah, the genetics of it having nothing to do with it blew me away.
Yeah, it was definitely.
I know the question that you were talking about too, or the comparison where it said that 2 white people had more chance of being diverse than a white person and a Korean.
Right.
Right. It just, looking at it, I'm like, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we're all connected in some way or another. So it just makes sense that, I mean, like it said, we're all one species. There's not a subspecies either. It's just, we're all one species, and we just all have these genetic mutations that make us a little bit different.
Exactly. So I think we're both in agreement on the first biggest myth.
Oh, definitely.
So I'll make a check note on that one. Race is being a genetic construct, being a myth.
Mm-hmm.
My second one that I thought was interesting, and that really kind of it almost made me check myself, as far as when I'm doing those tests, and when I'm sorting people and all of this. One of the ones that jumped out at me is the myth about the stereotypes that surround the different races.
Mm-hmm.
Even down to medical stuff. My thought process was, well, I mean, there's got to be some genetic basis to it, because what about sickle cell anemia?
Right.
Sickle cell being this whole thing that the media and was always portrayed when I was growing up, that this is something that young Black men dealt with.
Right,
and,
right.
and I'm thinking, okay, so it is a
It's race, it's culture, it's
yep.
yeah.
And so when I did the test and I found out that actually has bases in Greek,
Mm-hmm.
like not in Africa, but in Greece,
Right,
like
right.
completely not
You're
even
like,
related.
totally.
I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
oh, all right.
Yeah,
um, I think that the stereotypes that are out there right now are hugely prevalent in our society.
definitely.
Um, I in the world that we're in right now, I am constantly trying to like keep myself in check, because I try to be as like open-minded as possible, but then I also have to remind myself about the people that I grew up with
Right.
and their opinions and their thoughts influencing mine.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the more overt things that were ever said, I shunned, because I was like, that's horrifying. Why would you say
Oh,
things?
definitely, definitely. I mean, especially with, I mean, just to put it bluntly, I mean, both of us are white,
Yep.
we're white. And so growing up at our age, I mean, we're the same age. So just growing up in that age, our parents or our grandparents were not as open as we are. I mean, just growing up, they were, they went through different things that we did. But I mean, I think that led, especially myself, I mean, just teaching my kid that, you can't judge people on that. And, just with him, which I love, is that he doesn't see that. He doesn't, I'll ask him to describe somebody and he never describes the color of their skin. I mean, like, I'll ask him about their hair. He's like, well, they've got curly hair. I'm like, okay, great. And so
Yeah.
it's something that, learning from our parents, that we need to be open and we need to get this um, out of our culture. I mean, and it's more here, I think, in the US than it is in a lot of other places.
Oh
Just,
yeah.
people just judge on race, and everything is just, I mean, they were talking, with the housing and, I mean, even just the government does it. It's just, based on the color of your skin, or if you have this in your blood, or, I mean, even like you said, when you were talking about the different, like for Hawaiians, or, for Samoans and different things like that, everything was just different on how they judged you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Indian versus Black. I mean, you have to have this amount of, a drop of blood for one thing, and something else, or the color of your skin for one thing. And so, yeah, it was definitely eye-opening.
Yeah, I that one jumped out at me too when I was reading it. That whole one drop rule.
Right.
African Americans were defined by percentages, and that is extreme. That one drop rule with any known African ancestry, like
Mhm.
any, suddenly you
Right.
were considered Black. And
Right.
meanwhile, Native Americans being defined by that blood quantum rule.
Right. Right. And I
Um,
think that, I mean, to me, I feel like that stems from the government trying to like say, okay, well, if we don't have to pay you this because of this, but if you're, so they're using it to their benefit.
oh, huge.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. It's like whatever suits them is how they're going to judge what you are.
Yep. And it's like whereas the Blacks were maximized as to what they could call Black or African American
Right.
or Negro, because the bigger that pool is at the time, and historically, the more that I mean, way back when, the slavery pool,
Right.
like, oh, okay, you've got a drop in you, we now own you.
Right.
So there, it's got those kind of bases to it. Whereas
Right.
you brought up the point that I thought with the Native Americans, which is, when you've got education that's being paid out, when you've got reparations that are being paid out by the government, they're going
Right. They want to
to
minimize that.
hugely limit what they have to do. Yeah. So yeah, there's definite social constructs, there's political sides to it.
Definitely.
And it definitely proves our first one. So We kind of got away though, I think, from my my second myth about the
I
stereotype.
enjoy talking about that. I mean, I like talking about things like this with people that are open to talk about it. You know, it's
Seriously.
very, yeah, it's, you know, not to be just in the South, there's not a lot of openness, and just, I'm very, it, do your thing. That's my thing. I don't care what you do as long as you're not hurting me. So, you know, that's just always been my thing, and that's what we've taught our, you know, our child. So, but in the South, it's very, of course, that's not everybody, of course, but it's just, it's more.
Yeah, the way that I was sort of raised was always, you know, don't look in somebody else's pantry unless it's to make sure that it's full.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and kind of let other people do their thing, do your thing, and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, you're good.
Exactly. That is my motto there.
Yeah.
So,
So as far as the second myth goes, my thoughts are either like the stereotypes surrounding them, you know, the whole Asians are good at math,
right.
Black people are good at sports, things along
Right.
those lines.
Mhm.
I think that's a huge myth. While it may not necessarily be the biggest, I think it's one that as a culture we need to address still,
Right.
and we need to really kind of like you're doing, deprogram our kids from thinking that way.
Right.
Um, so I thought it would be one that we could easily incorporate into the poster.
Sure.
Did you
And
have
it's
any
very
other
common.
thoughts
I
on
mean,
the
it's
second one?
really common. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, did you have any other thoughts as to
No,
that or another?
no, I like that idea. I think that's a very common, a common myth. It may, like you said, it may not be the biggest, but it's common that a lot of people think that, and it's just something that we look at a lot.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
almost a matter of saying, you know, well, what do we define as the biggest myth? That which is most widespread, or that which is most different from what we believe?
Right. And I think this kind of gives us a little bit of both of that. I think it, you
Yeah,
know, something that a lot of people don't even think about. Um, you know, with the genetics and stuff, I think that it just doesn't ever occur to us. So doing that in the poster will raise awareness for that. And then the myths about the stereotypes. I mean, everybody has those stereotypes. I mean, whether you like to admit it or not, you have
right.
some type of stereotypes. And that's something that needs to be addressed, that says, hey, um, here's this myth, and this is what we need to talk about this.
Right, absolutely. So then I think between those two, if you're in agreement, then I think maybe we're pretty good with the two myths that we want to address on the poster.
Yep.
All right, so I'll make check mark on that for the statement. It's the race being a genetic construct, being a myth, that it's actually a social construct, and then for a broad myth as opposed to a big difference, the fact that stereotypes surrounding race are really just that. They're stereotypes, and they're not really based on genetics, or they're not really based in truth. So
Right.
So we can focus on that. So during this meeting, we discussed that. So our next step is to create that public service poster that disproves those two myths we've chosen. We need to make it clear as to the audience why they should care about the myths.
Right.
As far as splitting up the work for creating the poster, the categories for responsibilities that may be include writing, editing, designing visuals, formatting, layout, and fact checking. I think all of those are valid things that we need to include within the poster. So I know I tend to be very good at the designing side of things, like the visuals and making the pivot tables pretty.
Look good. Yes. We have learned that in our past experiences with each other. It's like, okay, the basics. I'm going to give you this information, and then you make it look pretty.
Absolutely. And what we could do, if you want to work on some of the writing and some of the facts, we can work on that. I'll contribute some of it as well, but I mean, if you want to be primary on that aspect, as far as the designing and the visuals and formatting, I can kind of focus on that.
Okay.
If I take designing, visuals, formatting, and layout as my primaries,
Mm-hmm.
I can still contribute to the fact checking, the editing, and the writing.
Right.
And then,
I mean, yeah, I was going to say it's kind of, I'll get all the information together, get it all fact checked, get everything going. And then if you want to make it look pretty with the editing, designing and stuff, and then I can, after that's done, we can, both go back in and make sure that it's formatted right and
sweet.
check it one last time.
Awesome.
Yeah, a little bit of everything in there and give
And
our ideas, hey, I want this picture. No.
so I'm just looking at my calendar for the week. So I know realistically what time frame I've got for most of this.
Mm-hmm.
I've got rehearsals on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. So
Okay.
what I could do is Tuesday night, if you can get me like some of the writing stuff by Tuesday, I
Okay.
can focus on Tuesday night on designing it.
Okay.
Then Thursday night, I can send it over to you, and we can either meet again through Zoom or we can just kind of communicate via
Chatter.
email. Yeah, just kind of
Okay.
get things cleared out.
Mm-hmm.
But then I figure at that point, if it works, then we can submit it on Thursday or Friday.
Okay. That sounds great.
Sweet. All right. Well, I think we've got a pretty good game plan
Yeah.
on the front then. Is there anything else that you want to add before we adjourn for the day?
I don't think so. I think that was a good conversation. It was relaxing because I knew you, so I wasn't like stressing out. Like, oh my
How
God.
do I talk to this stranger?
I know. No, I'm like, hey, this is Brian. So what? I know.
Awesome. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for meeting with me, and I will talk with you at work tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. All right. Sounds good.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.